they can be as fantastic as a faraway galaxy, as real as next door, laid back or action-packed. For a regular Joe, or even a pro, video games make fantasies come true.
Whether that's driving a Formula One race car, whether it's flying a spaceship, skiing down a mountain slope, or snowboarding, or being in a war. They let you do what you always wanted to do.
On the other hand, they've also been blamed for causing real problems.
The ability of our children to access pornographic and violent material on an M-rated video game is spiraling out of control.
To play or not to play? Despite the questions, more and more people are saying yes.
This is not a fad. When you ask people today if they play games, whether they intend to play as much or more in the future, more than half say they expect to play the same amount or more 10 years from now as they do today.
It's not only cool to be a gamer these days, it can also be profitable.
We're going to have a cool shootout. You guys can get a chance to play against me. How's it going, man?
At 24, Jonathan Wendell, who plays under the name Fatality, is one of the first superstars of professional video gaming.
Last year, I think I made close to around $231,000 just playing in tournaments. So gaming's definitely getting bigger. The prize money is also rising to the next level.
If you add up everything, the sales of hardware and software all across game platforms, the world is now spending $30 billion a year on video games. And the game playing population keeps growing.
I have an Xbox, GameCube.
Not all gamers are nerdy and ugly and have no lives outside of video games. Everybody plays video games. I'm sure like even the hottest of blonde chicks, and they'll play Snake on their cell phone when they're bored.
Now, the CNBC original documentary, Game On, the unauthorized history of video games.
Press start now.
Believe it or not, it all began with an atomic scientist. That's right, a nuclear physicist named Willie Higginbotham. In 1958, Higginbotham was working at the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island. Now, a nuclear research lab in the middle of suburbia at the height of the Cold War wasn't exactly a welcome neighbor. But to show its work was harmless, the lab decided to throw an open house, and Higginbotham had a great idea for it.
Willie Higginbotham took an oscilloscope. He built a tennis game into it. He called it Tennis for Two. He wanted something that was exciting and juicy for people to see. So he created this tennis game.
Tennis for Two was the hit of the open house. People waited online for hours for a chance to play the game. But that's as far as it went. After all, how many people have an oscilloscope? Yet the idea of playing games electronically on a screen didn't go away. In the early 1960s, engineering students at MIT became fascinated by computers and what could be done with them. One of those students was Steve Russell.
And he's a member of the Tech Model Railroad Club at MIT, who in 1960 got their hands on a PDP computer, one of the first computers to have a screen on it. And he was the one who came up with, I'm going to do a game. And he created two ships with a kind of a sun in the middle that had gravity, and they flew around and they tried to shoot each other.
Russell called the game Space War. It created a sensation among his fellow engineering students, not just at MIT, but also at other colleges fortunate to have computers then. Still, as smart as he was, Russell didn't have a clue about how to market his game.
It was on a $100,000 computer, so at 25 cents a game, people would only have to play it 400,000 times to pay for the computer to begin with.
But in 1966, a New Hampshire engineer named Ralph Baer, who worked for a defense contractor making electronics for the military,
testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
came up with the breakthrough that got video games out of the lab and into the living room.
I'd like to introduce you to the Pound Dots.
The answer was right in front of him, right in front of everybody.
Ralph was looking at a TV in the 60s and he was saying, you know, what can you do with a TV besides watch My Three Sons? And he came up with the idea that you could play a game on it.
I scribbled some notes and wrote a 4-page paper, and that was a Magna Carta of the home video game business. It's all there.
Even though Ralph Baer is called the father of video games, he is still a kid when it comes to demonstrating them.
You're going to try and catch me. Come and get me.
And this is the first one he ever made.
Oop, he got me already.
Just two dots chasing each other around the screen.
He's too good for me.
Before long, Baer felt ready to take a shot.
Boom.
And show his invention to one of his bosses.
Got it. And he came up and he shot the gun, and then he tried the gun from the hip, and he hit the spot, and he was delighted. He said, hey, this is neat. Yeah. And he gave us $2,000. Yeah.
But the company's board of directors started giving him grief.
Next thing I know, I'm surrounded by 10 people who look like this. What the hell is this? What's it doing here? But nobody said no. They just said, well, build something that we can license to somebody. Boom, got it.
Baer wondered who that somebody would be. He was stumped until he thought of the obvious.
The tubes are connected to the chassis is connected to the things to do.
It occurred to me, hell, all the parts that are in components, the electronic components that are in my games, are exactly the same parts as those used to build television sets.
RCA, Zenith, Sylvania, GE. For 2 years, Baer demonstrated his prototype machine to them all, until finally in 1971, he found a taker in Magnavox.
Magnavox presents Odyssey.
A year later, the Magnavox Odyssey, the electronic game of the future, made its debut.
There was a combination of absolute amazement and total bewilderment. You have to remember that nobody knew what to expect from a video game. People had no concept of it.
It might have been the iPod of its day if it hadn't been for Magnavox's marketing mistakes.
Right now, when you buy any Magnavox TV.
When they first showed Odysseys in television ads, they showed them, of course, in conjunction with Magnavox television sets. And they worded things in such a way that people got the idea that the Magnavox video game, the Odyssey, would only work on a Magnavox set. Oh, that didn't exactly enhance sales.
The Odyssey seemed destined for the same technological junkyard as 8-track tapes and quadraphonic sound. If making video games was ever to become an industry, what it needed was not another inventor or computer geek. What it needed was an inventor and computer geek who was also part visionary, part hustler. In a warehouse in Silicon Valley, he was already at work.
Coming up, the first video game to become a hit.
It took something like a Pong, you know, a nice little wood cabinet with a flat top, and you could put your beer on there to enable people to say, okay, ping pong, I get this.
That's next, as Game On continues.
This
The unauthorized stream.
A quarter, 25 cents. That's all it took to escape all that for this, Pong, the first video game to become a hit.
It took something like a Pong, you know, a nice little wood cabinet with a flat top, and you could put your beer on there to enable people to say, okay, ping pong, I get this.
Nolan Bushnell got it before anybody else. He's the guy who made it all happen, and in the process started an entirely new industry.
He was the first one to figure out how to market it. He looked at it not as a novelty, but as a new genre.
Remember Space War, the original computer game invented at MIT? As an engineering student at the University of Utah, Bushnell was sneaking into the school's computer lab to play it every chance he got. And as he played, he saw opportunity knocking.
Coincidentally, I was manager of the games department at an amusement park, Summers. It was obvious to me that if I had this in my arcades, they'd make a lot of money.
Bushnell took the idea with him as he moved from Utah to Silicon Valley to work as an engineer at Ampex. Using spare parts from work and a used television, he built a coin-operated version of Space War in 1971. The result was Computer Space, the very first arcade video game. As beautiful as it looked, it was a dud.
It was too esoteric. I mean, it made a lot of money around college campuses. It just made no money at all in a beer bar.
Still, Bushnell wasn't ready to declare game over. Instead, he left Ampex and formed a company that would design video games for coin-op manufacturers like Bally and Midway. For the name of his new company, he borrowed a term from the Japanese board game Go, Atari. It means prepare to be attacked. But no one at Atari was prepared for the game that would put the new company on the map. It all started when Bushnell hired a young engineer named Al Alcorn and gave him an exercise to get his feet wet in game design.
The idea was to build a video game that was the simplest possible thing you could think of. So I just went to the Walgreens drugstore and bought a $75 black and white TV.
Bushnell and Alcorn called the game Pong and installed the first Pong machine for a trial run at this bar in Sunnyvale, California, then known as Andy Capp's Tavern. What happened next made Andy Capp's the Los Alamos, the Cape Canaveral of the video game industry.
One day, within the first week, I got a call in the evening saying the machine stopped playing, and could I come down and fix it because I got customers that want to play the game. So I drove down to Sunnyvale and went to see the machine, opened the coin box up, and this big fistful of quarters just gushed out of the machine. All of a sudden, we had a real hit on our hands.
All Nolan Bushnell needed now was a workforce to manufacture the game.
I thought that the way you did it is you went down to the California unemployment office and you said, send me up some workers. I didn't realize that all you got were drug addicts and dope dealers when you did that.
We got some pretty colorful people, some parolees, and yeah, we had some issues, but the company survived those problems and went on to create a kind of a culture that's kind of permeated the valley.
We had a very, very young workforce.
And we'll see our supplies.
We soon found also that they were really more interested in a party than they were in raises or bonuses. And so we would set a quota, and if they hit a quota, we'd have a beer bust on the back dock. We were constantly hitting quota, therefore we had a lot of beer busts.
And there was plenty of money to pay for all those kegs. Within a year, Atari was raking in $1 million from the sales of Pong. But along came another company who wanted to take the wind out of those sales.
Odyssey by Magnavox.
Magnavox and Ralph Baer, the inventor of its Odyssey home video game system, thought that Nolan Bushnell's Pong looked amazingly like their ping pong game. And not by chance.
They were able to prove that Nolan Bushnell had gone to a closed Magnavox trade show, that he had in fact even played on an Odyssey.
Sure enough, there in the trade show's guest register was Bushnell's signature. Rather than face a lawsuit that could have ended Atari, Bushnell settled with Magnavox. But now Atari faced competition of its own as scores of other companies began making rip-offs of Pong.
So the way you stay ahead was to invent the next game. So you'd have that for a while until they copied it.
Atari brought out one arcade hit after another. Asteroids, Battle Zone, Lunar Lander, and a game invented by a hippie kid named Steve Jobs. Yes, the Steve Jobs.
He really was out there in left field. With very strange ideas about diet and water and air and a few other things.
But the game that Jobs and his pal Steve Wozniak created became one of Atari's biggest hits, Breakout. Within a few years, Jobs and Wozniak would break out of Atari to form a little company called Apple.
And he wanted me to invest. And I could have had a third of Apple Computer for $50,000. I kind of regretted that.
Actually, Bushnell had enough on his plate running Atari. Every moment of his day was dedicated to finding ways to stay ahead of the competition.
Strong piece of stuff.
The answer, he thought, would be a home version of Pong. Unfortunately, no one else seemed to think so.
We went to the toy fair in New York, presented the first Pong, sold none. Zero.
But then the largest retailer in the world in the 1970s came to the rescue, Sears. They put the home version of Pong in their 1975 Christmas catalog. 150,000 home Pong machines were sold just during the holiday season alone.
Once upon a time, you could give a kid a top and a jump rope for Christmas, or perhaps a small doll. Not anymore.
Within a year, there were 75 companies making their own home video game machines. To stay ahead of them, Bushnell had an idea for a state-of-the-art game console that was actually a computer. What he didn't have was the money to manufacture it.
I did a calculation how much it was going to cost me to raise the capital and the uncertainty. And I felt that the best thing to do was to sell the company.
And so, in 1976, Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million.
We thought Warner Communications understood the hit business, the hit music business, the hit movie business, and would understand that some games don't work and some games do. So that was the choice. At the time, it seemed like a great deal.
At first, everything at Atari was the same. As chairman of the board, Bushnell was still coming up with new ideas. Like a chain of restaurants where kids could play video games. Yes, Nolan Bushnell is also the father of Chuck E. Cheese.
Children the world over are the same. They like fun, food, entertainment, and games.
It was a secret trick to open up new locations to sell more video games, is what that was about. Absolutely brilliant. Worked great. Except the pizza was never very good. The engineers didn't make very good pizza.
But the honeymoon between Warner Communications and Nolan Bushnell ended quicker than you can say pepperoni, especially after Warner brought in a former textile executive named Ray Kassar to keep an eye on its new company. By then, Atari had brought out its new game console, the VCS, also known as the 2600, the machine that was supposed to keep the company on top. But after a slow start, Bushnell lost faith in the VCS and tried to get Warner to drop it.
I basically told them that they were a bunch of idiots, and you don't say that to executives.
So they said, you know, Nolan, we're tired of you. Go away.
In 1979, Warner Communications fired Nolan Bushnell and replaced him with Ray Kassar.
Mr. Kassar was quoted as saying how to handle these engineers. He says, oh, I've used to them. I worked at Burlington Industries, and they're just like their product fashion designers, high-strung prima donnas. I know how to handle them. They're a dime a dozen. Well, within a week, we had a T-shirt made that said, I'm just another high-strung prima donna engineer at Atari.
Atari was only as good as its engineers, the geniuses like Alan Miller and David Crane, who created the hit games that drove earnings. And they thought it was about time they got recognition for their talent.
All the work was done by just one person, all the graphics, all the music, all the sound effects, all the programming.
Our best engineers were getting paid $50,000 a year, and they could see that their work that one guy could make in 3 months was generating $20, $30 million of revenue. And they said, I want a piece of that action.
Not only did they not get a piece of the action, they hardly got any credit.
What specific games have you designed?
Well, at Atari, we don't really like to talk about who designed what.
Why not?
Well, because we like to make the game the superstar as opposed to the programmer.
Why shouldn't you get credit if you design the game?
Well, because it is a corporate product. Okay, these are games by Atari, not games by Steve Wright or some other person.
One of the guys said, we can get 4 programmers off the street for the kind of money that you're asking for.
It was the final straw. Alan Miller and his fellow designers quit Atari and started their own company, Activision, to make games that would play on the VCS. In its first year of operation, Activision made a profit of $13 million. Pretty soon, other engineers were also leaving Atari to start their own third-party software companies. The video game boom was on. But in it were the seeds of an even bigger explosion that few, if any, in the industry would survive.
Coming up, a Japanese import storms the U.S.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
But for the video game industry, trouble was lurking just around the corner. That's next, as Game On continues. To Game...
In 1978, just as Americans were starting to buy Hondas and Toyotas, their kids were spending every cent they had on another product from Japan. A dream come true for any kid who saw Star Wars a zillion times and wished that they could be a Jedi warrior too. Space Invaders.
Space Invaders said, hey, you want to be Luke Skywalker? Here you go. You had this thumping soundtrack with this heartbeat that would get you more and more excited as you played, and these wonderful spacey sound effects.
Fighting Space Invaders' never-ending onslaught of evil aliens became a Japanese obsession.
They had to increase the number of 100 yen pieces they were minting because so many were inside Space Invaders machines at any one time that they were running out of 100 yen pieces.
The yen to play Space Invaders turned out to be just as great in America. By 1979, there were 60,000 Space Invaders machines in the United States, each making $300 to $400 a week. Midway, the coin-op company that brought Space Invaders to America, had invaded the space of Atari, the industry leader, in a big way. Rather than fight it, Atari CEO Ray Kassar hitched a ride into orbit with the game by licensing the home rights.
Ray was the one who looked at Space Invaders and he said, you know, if we made a Space Invaders cartridge for the VCS, I'll bet you that would sell.
It's a bet Kassar won. Sales of the Atari VCS console doubled. And then Japan invaded again with an even bigger blockbuster, Pac-Man.
When they were making Pac-Man, the guy who was leading the project took his team to lunch. They went for pizza in Tokyo, and somebody had taken the first slice of pizza, and then he looked down and there was Pac-Man staring at him.
Japan had started a global epidemic.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
Towels, ties, T-shirts. So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business here.
But not every Japanese video game manufacturer was making it big overseas. A playing card company turned toy and game maker named Nintendo just couldn't get off the ground in America. At the time, Howard Lincoln was an attorney for Nintendo's struggling American division.
They had a huge inventory of coin-operated video games, Radar Scope, which was the name of the game, which were not selling.
But what Nintendo also had was Shigeru Miyamoto. Today, he's considered one of the greatest video game designers of all time. But back then, he was a brand new hire, personally discovered by Nintendo's boss, Hiroshi Yamauchi.
Hiroshi Yamauchi looked at him and said, wow, you know, there's something special about this guy. There's some kind of creativity here that I've never seen before. The guy's going to be a force.
Miyamoto started off by creating something that no other video games ever had, a story.
And I thought of, well, if we have a guy who's chasing after a gorilla, who's kidnapped a girl as he goes up, then that would be something that would be very fun.
Not only did Miyamoto come up with a wacky game, he also gave it a wacky name, Donkey Kong.
My idea for the name was to have something that essentially meant dumb monkey. And in Japan, the word Kong is very closely associated with gorillas. And so we took that, and I had, from somewhere or someone, heard that in English donkey means dumb. And so actually the name came about perhaps because of my somewhat limited English abilities at the time.
But Donkey Kong's popularity was unlimited. It became the most popular game in the world after Pac-Man, and Nintendo's first hit in America. Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and Space Invaders ushered in the golden age of video games. By 1981, Americans had dropped 20 billion quarters into arcade machines. But no golden age lasts forever, and this one ended the way it began, with another alien from outer space. The year was 1982. E.T. was the blockbuster movie of the year. Everybody wanted to cash in on the E.T. craze, and the video game industry was no exception.
Hey! Mr. Intellivision.
Before long, there was Henry Thomas, the young actor from the movie, starring in commercials for Mattel's Intellivision game system. Steve Ross, the head of Atari's parent company Warner Communications, had an even bigger plan for exploiting the extraterrestrials' extraordinary popularity.
He wanted to get Steven Spielberg to come make movies for Warner Brothers instead of just being with Universal, where he was with Jaws and E.T.
Great, good. Print that one.
And to show that he could, pardon my language, that he could piss with the big boys, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $25 million for the licensing fee to license E.T. for the Atari VCS.
When Spielberg said okay, Ross ordered Atari to have the game ready by the start of the Christmas shopping season. There was only one problem. That favorite time of year for the kids and their retailers was only 6 weeks away.
And, you know, of course, the game was terrible. It's remembered as one of the worst games of all time, and deservedly so.
On the heels of Atari's worst game came December 7th, 1982. A day that will live in video game infamy.
There may be trouble in Toyland, at least in the video games division. This week, industry giant Warner Communications, makers of Atari, announced that 1982 earnings would be far below previous expectations.
The day of the announcement, Warner's stock plummeted. Atari CEO Ray Kassar tried putting on a brave front.
We've been in the limelight, and any little sneeze, I think, has had a pneumonia impact on the street, but business is still very good.
But then came another bombshell.
Which was he sold a lot of Warner Communications stock. So he sells the stock, he makes his announcement.
Facing charges of insider trading, Kassar turned over the $81,000 profit he had made selling the stock. A few months later, he resigned from Atari. The SEC later cleared him of any wrongdoing. But the damage was done. Atari lost $350 million and laid off 3,000 employees. And as Atari crashed, so did the entire industry. Mattel, the maker of Intellivision, faced a deficit of $200 million. Coleco was on the verge of bankruptcy. On the coin-op side, Bally Midway saw its profits slide by 85%.
We had this hit product called the Atari VCS. It made billions of dollars. It was a great product, obviously, but it was going to end. Eventually it petered out. I think every game that could have been made for Atari was made.
And not all of them were hits.
There were a tremendous amount of bad games being made. There were also some very good games being made. But when the market is flooded with an inferior product, you can only burn people so many times.
According to legend, and very well verified legend, Atari took millions of games that just they could not sell. They put them on some trucks, they drove them out to New Mexico, they dumped them in the desert.
With Atari's 18-wheeler funeral procession, the golden age of video games was laid to rest. There were no survivors. Or so it seemed.
Coming up, it's Mario to the rescue.
It had vibrant colors, it had distinct images. Mario looked like a person, he didn't look like a stick figure.
How an unassuming plumber saved the video game industry. Next, as Game On continues. Back to Game On.
By 1985, video games were history. But at the Consumer Electronics Show that year, tucked away in a small booth, was the company that brought the world Donkey Kong, Nintendo. The Japanese game maker was exhibiting its latest product, the Famicom, a video game console. The video game business may have died in America, but it was alive and well in Japan. In fact, Nintendo had sold 3 million Famicoms there. Still, that didn't matter much stateside.
All of the buyers thought, you know, this is really slick, really neat, but they would not touch it, even if we guaranteed the sale. They said it was simply it's too risky.
Not wanting to scare off any more American retailers than it already had, the company stopped calling the Famicom a video game machine and renamed it the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. For good measure, they also added a decoy.
We came up with a robot so that we could tell buyers, and they in turn could tell their superiors, that this was not just a video game system, it was a robotic video game system or some nonsense like that. And it worked.
What didn't work for Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi were the test market plans.
We as Americans were saying, well, you know, you go to some place like Peoria or wherever they test market products. And he thought that was crazy. He said, if I'll give you one chance, you got one shot. You try to introduce this in New York City, and if you can make it work there, then we'll go from there.
During Christmas 1985, Nintendo sold 50,000 units in New York, enough to prove that there was still a market in America for video games. And what really helped sell the NES was the video game included with it, a home version of Nintendo's Japanese arcade blockbuster, Super Mario Brothers.
If you saw Super Mario Brothers on the NES, it didn't look a thing like anything you saw on an old Atari machine. It looked like the arcade game. It had vibrant colors. It had distinct images. Mario looked like a person. He didn't look like a stick figure. You saw clouds and mushrooms and creatures.
It all paid off. In a poll taken a year later, kids across the country were asked what they wanted most for Christmas. Their number one choice, the NES. By 1988, Nintendo had a whopping 90% share of the video game market. The company's domination of the industry got even bigger when it introduced its video game equivalent of Sony's Walkman. And Nintendo had none other to thank for its success than Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, sort of. Right at the end of the Cold War, a Soviet computer engineer named Alexei Pajitnov created a puzzle game called Tetris. When the Iron Curtain lifted, Nintendo got its first look at Tetris and started talking rubles.
And we knew that that could be the killer game on Game Boy, the launch title.
Even with that tiny monochrome screen on a Game Boy, you could show the blocks very efficiently for Tetris. You could distinguish, you know, the shapes and everything, and it was perfect. It was the perfect coupling.
Thanks to Tetris, Game Boy became an instant hit, selling 32 million units in its first 3 years. Nintendo seemed unbeatable.
There is a new addiction in America. Nintendo video games, more than a pastime, more than a passing fancy. For many, a kind of narcotic.
But at that very moment in time, Nintendo's days as the only game in town were numbered.
The new generation of kids were ready to play games again. Those who had played wanted to come back in. Sega saw this and said, there's room for more than one player in the market. If Nintendo can do it, Sega can do it.
A veteran executive of Coleco, Mattel, and Atari, Michael Katz became president of Sega's American division in 1989, just as the company was about to roll out the Genesis game console to replace its unsuccessful Master System.
When I joined Sega, I was told that the only Japanese I would be expected to know was the phrase Yakumandai. And I said, that's interesting. What does it mean? And I was told it meant 1 million units. So that became my marching orders. That became the prayer that I was supposed to give every morning when I woke up and every evening when I went to sleep.
Genesis puts you in the game with the...
To help answer his prayers, Katz went after athletes like Joe Montana to star in games for the Genesis. And he initiated a no-holds-barred ad campaign.
We had to do something drastic. We had to hit hard. We had to go after that 90% of the market. It was Nintendo.
By 16.
Unfortunately, Genesis didn't do as well in America as Sega Japan had hoped.
Ultimately, we only did half a yuck when I was at Sega. We did 500,000 units.
Out went Michael Katz as president of Sega America, and in charged Tom Kalinske, an executive from Mattel.
I went back to a board meeting in Japan and I said, okay, we're doing things wrong. Our price is too high at $199. We have to take our price down. We're going to take Nintendo on, head on. We're going to make fun of them in our advertising. We need to develop more software in the United States. We can't rely just on Japanese software. We have a title in our Genesis system called Altered Beast. It sounds like it's demon worship or something.
To Sega's stunned board of directors, Kalinsky's plan also sounded like the work of the devil.
And they said, well, we think you're completely wrong. This is not the right thing to do. And they all got up to leave. So I thought, well, this was an interesting 3-month career.
But then, at the very last moment, an angel appeared in the form of Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama.
And Hayao Nakayama turned at the door and said, okay, we brought you on to make these decisions, so we'll go ahead and agree with you, and you can do what you have just proposed.
Before long, Sega had a new hero. No, not Tom Kalinske, Sonic the Hedgehog.
One of the things we bragged about was how fast we could have action on our system, how fast we could move sprites around on the system. And so Sonic was designed to be a very fast-moving character.
And they just did very, very edgy ads.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one?
The consumer was left with the impression that, you know, if you were cool, you used a Sega system, and if you were a 5-year-old kid, you used a Nintendo system.
All of a sudden, the share started going up, and we went from, you know, literally single-digit share to double-digit share to 20% share to 30% share. At that point, I knew we had arrived.
Yakumandai, 1 million units, was no longer a prayer. It became a reality several times over. By 1992, Sega had captured 55% of the console market. Sonic had beaten Mario, and while the Plumber and the Hedgehog would challenge each other to rematch after rematch, lurking in the wings was a giant who would ultimately trample them both.
Coming up, a new player in the video game called PlayStation.
Sony was saying, look, this is going to replace the PC. It's going to replace the DVD player.
But another technology giant had other ideas. That's next, as Game On continues. Game continues.
In the 1990s, more and more people were discovering that personal computers were also fun game machines. And when computers started coming equipped with CD-ROM drives, the gameplay got even better.
You know, the game of the year has always been a board game, and this year it's not.
The CD-ROM game Myst sold over 1 million copies.
It's like a novel in which you are participating.
And pretty soon, Nintendo wanted CD-ROM drives for their very own. Nintendo and Sony began exploring a partnership. It seemed like a match made in heaven. Nintendo, the savior of the video game, and Sony, pioneer of the compact disc, joining forces. The plan was for Sony to provide an add-on CD-ROM drive to the NES console. But then came the prenuptial agreement.
Sony wanted the rights to all the software that was made for it. It was on their format, and they wanted control of that. Nintendo became very suspicious. They saw themselves as kind of handing over the keys to the kingdom to Sony.
So Nintendo secretly began talks with Philips, the European electronics company that had co-created the CD. Sony didn't have a clue.
Sony held a press conference and they said, yes, we're partners with Nintendo, we're building this PlayStation. The next day, Nintendo came out with Philips and said, no, we're partners with Philips.
Hell hath no fury like an electronics giant scorned. Sony decided to make the PlayStation console on its own and went on the offensive, stealing away software makers who had been developing games for Nintendo. For game publishers, it was good business. A Sony CD-ROM was cheaper and faster to program and produce than a Nintendo game cartridge.
It took a lot of time to actually manufacture the cartridges. So if you had a hit game, you will obviously want to sell more. The only problem is you can't get those cartridges into the stores for another 3 months because you had a very long lead time.
Games also looked better on PlayStation than they did on either Nintendo or Sega.
The PlayStation really was a technological leap forward in terms of what you could do with graphics in a game. And inevitably, when we would make video games and go in and focus test them with kids, the one thing that the kids would really talk about were graphics.
It's just like if you were in the game, it just sucks you right in, you know?
I just really like how it's real 3D, real interactive, and the graphics are amazing. Not like most other games I played at all. Sega, Genesis, and Super Nintendo.
The next thing you know, they owned the market. They had a good system, they priced it aggressively, they were the ones who remembered that you were supposed to be giving away razors to sell the blades.
The blades in this case being the games themselves. That's where console makers make their real money.
The guy who controls the proprietary format is the toll keeper. Everybody's got to pay him money to put their product on his machines. It's a licensing business. And if you become the king of the hill, everybody has to salute you. And they have to salute you by writing a check.
PlayStation.
All those checks made Sony's revenge not only sweet, but profitable. Debuting in 1995, PlayStation became the world's best-selling game console and was soon generating 40% of Sony Electronics' annual revenues. With Sony the new king of the hill, Nintendo and Sega became pretenders to the throne, reduced to a distant second and third place. By then, Sony's plans for a next-generation PlayStation, the PlayStation 2, had awakened the gaming instincts of another technology giant, Microsoft.
Sony was saying, look, this is going to replace the PC. It's going to replace the DVD player. It's going to be the anchor of your home entertainment experience and can go beyond that as well.
Replacing the PC was not what the leading computer software maker in the world wanted to hear, especially since PlayStation was outselling the top 5 PC makers combined.
The growth of the PlayStation business outpaces the overall industry growth.
The sort of messaging Sony did around PlayStation 2 certainly catalyzed a lot of kind of competitive spirit amongst people at Microsoft who really, didn't particularly enjoy Sony saying that a game console was going to replace Excel, for instance, or Word for Windows.
What Bill Gates at some point said was, hey, look, there's a living room. That's one room in the house we haven't broken into yet.
Just 1 week after Sony released PlayStation 2 in the spring of 2000, Bill Gates broke in.
Well, here it is, the first time it's been seen in public.
Microsoft would be making its own game machine, the Xbox.
Hey, you guys want coffee and donuts?
Its premiere in November 2001 at Toys R Us in Times Square gave New York City one of its first moments of fun after the tragedy of 9/11, with Gates himself on hand to sell the very first one. Over the next 4 years, Microsoft would sell an additional 20 million Xboxes, thanks in large part to one game, Halo.
When it seems like all is lost.
It's RoboCop with the Colonial Marines from the Aliens movie fighting the Predators on Larry Niven's Ringworld. Oh, no, wait, and then zombies. That's ridiculous. But the game, that's what you always wanted to play. You want to be RoboCop in that situation.
While Halo put Xbox ahead of Nintendo's GameCube in consoles, it still couldn't push Sony off its throne. Since introducing Xbox and its successor Xbox 360, Microsoft has lost $4 billion in its attempt to enter the living room.
It doesn't matter to Microsoft that the Xbox division lost money every single quarter, 4 quarters a year for 4 years. Didn't matter. They were pleased because the way they saw it, they walked into a market where no one took them seriously. And the next thing you know, they were a player.
That was in the console market. In the handheld market, the king of the hill remained Nintendo with its introduction of the DS system in 2004.
The simplicity is in the interface. It's a pen. Everybody knows how to use a pen. My 3.5-year-old boy knows how to use a pen.
User-friendly also became Nintendo's strategy for regaining a larger piece of the console market in 2006 with its Wii system.
Nintendo said, okay, we're going up against Sony and Microsoft here. Let's not try and do what they do well. Let's try and do what we do well, which is to make really great, really complete experiences with style and that people want to play.
And so the game behind the games continues. After much delay, Sony announced it was finally ready to release PlayStation 3.
The most interesting thing about the video game business is that each 4 or 5 years there's a new hardware system, so there's a complete reshuffling of the deck. Market shares don't change by a couple of percentage points, they change by 20 or 30 or 40% every 5 years.
It's a horse race. People have their favorite horse, you know what I mean? A lot of people have a dog in the fight. A lot of people are going to make a lot of money, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money.
As in the pioneer days of Atari and television and Coleco, one fact remains true. A game machine is only as good as the games created for it.
Next, behind the scenes at the world's largest game publisher.
So these are some bird tweets. Ball going in the cup.
How'd they do that? We'll show you next as Game On continues. Now, back to Game Unauthorized History of Video Games.
It looks like a college campus a week after finals, but don't let the laid-back, chilled-out setting fool you. This is headquarters of the NFL.
Launches it deep to the left.
The Mafia. And Bond.
Who are you?
The name is Bond.
James Bond.
Well, at least they're virtual counterparts.
All right, that's fixed.
That's right, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to Electronic Arts, the world's largest video game publisher. Creating fantasies here is all about making them seem as real life.
You take the two-dimensional map and add that on, and you get your VJ.
In EA's Tiger Woods PGA Pro Tour, it's par for the course.
Callaway clubs or Cobra drivers or Nike putters, you're able to actually pick those brands up, put them on your golfer, and so not only does your golfer look how you want him to look, he's playing with the equipment that you're used to playing, and it really makes you feel like you're in the game.
I think it's a 7-iron.
If God is in the details, then heaven might look something like EA.
We come up with a list of sounds that we think we're going to need, and then we set about going out and recording these things. Right now, I've selected Scottish birds, because this is a Scottish course, and so these are some bird tweets. The flag flapping, ball going in the cup. That's the big payoff right there.
For their James Bond title, From Russia with Love, EA spared no expense to get the right guy to play 007, Sean Connery himself.
May I help you? A dry martini. Shaken, not stout.
We had some lines in there that were a little bit more modern, and he'd say, I don't even know this line. So, you know, he dialed us into the 60s. He dialed us into Bond. We could have made the game, but it wouldn't have been near as good.
Bringing Hollywood showmanship to video games has been part of EA's style since the very beginning.
That was a complete bomb. They were really desperate.
That's not just any gamer traveling down memory lane. That is Trip Hawkins, the founder of Electronic Arts. Even as a kid in the pre-Pong years, Hawkins was a game player.
I'd want to play games with my friends, but they would want to watch television. And when I first heard about computers, I thought, aha, if we put the game in the computer, we can actually make it look and feel like television, but then it'll be a truly interactive experience where you're really there and you're part of the action.
The only problem was it was the 1970s, and Hawkins had to wait until computers caught up with his ideas for them.
And I thought, okay, well, how many years is it going to take before there's enough computers in the home that I can make the games that I want to make? And I decided that if I waited until 1982, that would be long enough. And that was 7 years away.
He used the time wisely, working as director of product marketing at a new company called Apple. Hawkins carefully observed everything, especially the software designers.
These guys are very ingenious prima donnas, pretty much just like the divas that run around Hollywood. So why not have a company that's really themed around doing a better job of taking care of them and nurturing them, and in fact kind of making them into brands.
That's exactly what he did when he left Apple to start EA. Inspired by the music business, Hawkins packaged his designers' games with covers that looked like record albums. They sold well, but the star power of game designers never shined as bright as, say, Mick Jagger's. Hawkins thought, why not get a real celebrity to star in a game? And what celebrities could be bigger than pro athletes?
And I thought we could do one-on-one basketball, and we can draw 2 basketball players. And then it was just obvious to me immediately it had to be Dr. J and Larry Bird.
Released in 1983, Dr. J and Larry Bird Go One-on-One was a smash. But what Hawkins really wanted was a full team sport, a football game featuring coach and commentator John Madden. But at the time, having 11 players on each team like a real game was technically impossible. Hawkins, however, wouldn't give up on the idea.
It took 4 years, and it became known in the company as Trip's Folly. And at one point, the auditors had to come personally to see me to explain that, I'm sorry, but we have to write this off because it's obviously not an asset. It's obviously just an expense that you are never going to recoup.
He's laughing because Tripp's folly helped make EA the first third-party software publisher to earn $1 billion a year. With a new edition released annually, John Madden's NFL has remained at the top of the video game bestseller charts. Becoming the MVP of software, Hawkins turned his attention to hardware with his next big idea. He spearheaded the move in the mid-90s to create a standard for video game systems.
So let's get rid of all this Nintendo and Sony incompatibility. Let's create one single standard. It'll be called the 3DO standard.
With Hawkins licensing the hardware technology to Panasonic, the 3DO console made its debut in 1993.
And it was fantastic. Amazing 3D graphics, stuff you're not going to get for another couple years till the original PlayStation comes around. But nobody wants it.
Part of the problem was the price. At $700, the 3DO was the most expensive game console ever.
We were just hoping that because of all the other features that it had, it would look really more like a hi-fi purchase or a TV or a VCR. So that was one of the lessons learned, is that nope, it's going to be viewed as a game system, it's going to be judged as a game system, and it's too expensive for a game system, even with all the whizzy new capabilities.
Trip Hawkins wasn't able to get everyone to agree on one console for all, but the industry did set a standard for working conditions. And that wasn't necessarily a good thing.
It's somewhat inevitable that at the end of the project, people end up coming in on weekends, working late hours.
We have a very flexible work environment, and if you're a new Wild Tangent employee, we tell you you can work any 80 hours a week you like.
I lived away from home for almost 3 months, helping get the game done in the final crunch stage. So I didn't see my friends, my family for a while, although I was allowed some conjugal visits.
We're still making tweaks on the models, but we've got to nail that in the next few weeks if we're going to stay on track.
Most of the crunch time is spent making everything perfect, eliminating the bugs, those errors that can ruin gameplay and ultimately game sales.
It's crises every day. You're not putting a spacecraft in space, but you are like figuring out why Kim Possible is walking through walls on level 7. And if you're doing it right and you're working together, we find it kind of thrilling.
Not everyone agrees. In 2004, the fiancé of an EA programmer made news when she reported that her husband-to-be was required to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Not long after, programmers and graphic artists at EA sued the company for unpaid overtime. EA eventually paid out a total of $30 million in settlements and changed its overtime policies. Still, it's a far cry from the days when Trip Hawkins ran EA and gave designers the star treatment. But at Hawkins' new game company, Digital Chocolate, the tradition continues.
I share the ownership with everyone. If you keep advancing, you'll just keep getting more stock options, because that's fair.
Coming up, the video game industry under attack.
It's just the worst kind of message to kids.
Video game violence. Next, as Game On continues. CNBC. Now, back to...
A little over 100 years ago, in one of the first movies ever made, a cowboy aimed his six-shooter right at the audience and fired away point blank. Obviously, violence in the media is nothing new. But video games are different. Their audiences can shoot back, and that gets a lot of people up in arms.
When you ask people to come up with just a word that comes to mind when you mention video games, almost all the time it's violence. And yet, if all we did was produce violent entertainment, we wouldn't be on the verge of becoming the second largest entertainment industry in the world.
Even in the earliest days of Atari,
gets aggressive, second round.
There was mayhem and destruction in video games, up to a point.
We actually had a rule that sounds very quaint right now, so that you could
blow up a tank, you could blow up an airplane. But that you couldn't harm a humanoid figure. And we stuck to it.
That rule was broken in 1976 when one of Atari's competitors brought out Death Race.
And the object of the game was to drive over pedestrians for points. Now, it sounds horrible and terrifying. The graphics of this is a couple years after Pong. Okay, you got blocks, you know, stick figures. The outcry over this game led to it being pulled off of locations. It led to people not buying it.
By the 90s, better graphics led to more realistic blood and guts. And the arcade hit Mortal Kombat.
He takes out your head and your spine's connected.
Before long, both Nintendo and Sega announced plans to bring the game's trademark skull-crushing and spine-ripping into homes everywhere. But privately, the folks who brought the world Mario wondered if they could really get that down and dirty.
Our standards were not to allow that blood, and we ended up insisting that our licensee take out the blood, and I think we changed the blood from red to green, something like that. Sega, meanwhile, said, hey, we got the real stuff, the real red blood.
Whatever the color, Mortal Kombat's blood got Sega and Nintendo into real trouble.
That I agree that everything that we've done has not been perfect. As a matter of fact,
the game prompted Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut to hold hearings in 1993 on video game violence and its effects on children.
I know that one place parents want us to draw the line is with violence in video games.
This morning, the Software Publishers Association
With the government breathing down its neck, the industry decided to police itself, announcing the formation of the Entertainment Software Association and a game rating system.
We provide empowering information that allows consumers to make informed choices. And we do it more comprehensively than any other entertainment industry does in terms of providing both content information and age guidance right on the package.
Would you...
But the same week the hearings began, a training course in murder.
We found out that those boys were big Doom players, and they said that their massacre at their high school would be like a level of Doom. And people got very upset from that.
It was the scapegoat. You know who else liked to play violent video games called Doom? Most of America, most of the children in America, and yet they did not go crazy and shoot people.
USC professor Peter Vorderer specializes in the psychology of entertainment. He's one of the experts who feel that video games could push children with violent impulses to act on their feelings.
If that sort of behavior is encouraged by the game, and if somebody's ready to show that sort of behavior, then the impact is quite likely, yes.
Not so, argues Entertainment Software Association President Douglas Lowenstein.
If you look at the most independent and objective research out there, which has been done by governments, which has been done by other organizations around the world, you find a great deal of skepticism that there's any compelling research that links playing violent games to aggressive behavior.
But even industry veterans wonder about the effects of playing violent video games.
After I've played a couple hours of a driving game, a racing game, and I get in my own car, I drive more aggressively. After I've played a couple hours of a violent game, I feel more hostile towards people.
The issue was raised again in 2003 when an 18-year-old named Devin Moore went on a rampage in an Alabama police station, killing 2 police officers and a dispatcher. After he was captured, Moore reportedly said, quote, "Life is like a video game. Everyone's got to die sometime," end quote. Convicted in 2005, Moore, it turned out, had been playing one game day and night for months, the bestseller Grand Theft Auto.
You want to shoot people and carjack them and take their cars, it's an integral part of the game. You're playing a criminal. Is it a reprehensible game in a lot of ways? Yeah. Would I ever let my kid play it? No. But my kid is going to play it. He is.
How can he be so sure? Well, according to a recent survey, 7 out of 10 children report playing M-rated games. 45% have purchased adult-rated titles despite store policies prohibiting sales to minors.
Yes, it is. Grand Theft Auto. Step right up.
How about a little coffee?
And more than a few kids viewed this scene in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which prompted Senator Hillary Clinton to call for a federal investigation.
The ability of our children to access pornographic and violent material on an M-rated video game is spiraling out of control.
In 2005, Senators Clinton and Lieberman introduced the Family Entertainment Protection Act to prevent the sale of mature and adults-only games to minors. While the bill awaits debate in Congress, some states have instituted similar laws. But the Entertainment Software Association has fought successfully to get many of those laws overturned as unconstitutional.
Our view is government has no business getting involved in regulating artistic expression and creative freedom. And these laws that seek to ban sales of games based on their content are a fundamental abridgment of the First Amendment.
Just tell your kid you don't want Grand Theft Auto in the house. That's enough. They understand that even though they're going to go and they're going to play it at 15 different friends' houses, my parents don't want it in the house. That's a very powerful message.
Ready? Go grab it.
Of course, not all kids play video games filled with devastation and destruction. This little guy created a game that's different and became a hero for it.
Yay, sword!
Coming up, when kids' life isn't all fun and games.
You can't give up.
Video games that can save lives. Next, when Game On continues. The unauthorized history of video continues.
This is Dance Dance Revolution, a video game that's part disco, part exercise machine. And there's Brain Age, a personal trainer for your brain with puzzles, memory tests, and math problems.
See, it really does require concentration. Blue, yellow, blue, red.
Yes, believe it or not, there are video games that are actually good for you.
Hard, push everything you've got. Come on, go, you can do it. Push. You're okay, you're there. Yes, excellent.
We're at the University of Maryland for the annual Games for Health Conference, a meeting of minds of game developers and healthcare professionals.
You give her sort of an idea. You know, I'm not feeling so great, so she will adjust the workout based on that. There is gold to be mined in the growing use of gaming besides just what you see on your Xbox or PlayStation or GameCube at home.
Our game is called Care Connections, and it's a CNA training program to help people learn how to care for residents in nursing homes.
This is the interactive trauma trainer. We try to make a surgical decision-making training tool, and the patient himself will, do well or not so well depending on which decisions you make.
They're called serious games. Games that educate as well as entertain. It's a genre made famous by America's Army, the video game from the U.S. Army that started as a recruiting tool and became one of the most popular games for PCs, and not just with PFCs.
In today's field
training, you will learn the basic first aid skills that can save your buddy's life.
A mom credited the game with saving her son's life. Her youngest son actually was able to put into practice the basics, ABCs of life-saving, to save his older brother when an accident happened in the house.
Other conference presenters are equally proud of their work. LucasArts software designer Eric Johnson created some of the Indiana Jones video games. But he's not here to talk about those adventures.
This entire project was facilitated, of course, by Make-A-Wish.
Make-A-Wish has a very simple mission. We fulfill the wishes of children with life-threatening illnesses between the ages of 2.5 and 18. That's it.
Come here, Cheddar. Cheddar.
But Make-A-Wish had never gotten a wish quite like 8-year-old Ben Duskins. Diagnosed with leukemia, Ben had gone through months of chemotherapy and was finally in remission when he made his wish.
Ben's wish was to make a video game and send it back into the treatment center for the kids who were still there.
All right, good job. Okay, let's go back.
I just wanted them to learn what's going through their body and like what the medicine is doing. Every Tuesday we went to LucasArts and we worked for about 2 hours saying, okay, what should we do here? So he got ideas and I got ideas. Cool.
Yep, the voices.
But channeling Ben's ideas for a game about cancer wasn't always child's play.
Building fun is difficult, and when you try to build fun where the antagonist is cancer, that's almost impossible. I don't think that it could have been done if Ben had not been so mature and articulate.
After 6 months of work, Ben and Eric finally had a game.
Ready? Go grab it.
The game is about you're a little person on a hoverboard who shoots cancer cells.
Players also collect shields to battle monsters.
This monster is guarding the Barf shield, and his name is Robarf.
Ben's way of representing chemo side effects like hair loss and nausea.
The robot is throwing giant green globes of barf, and it slows you down.
The object of his game? Put the cancer in remission.
All right, should we,
Yay, sword!
Yeah, the sword's better.
Underlying the game is Ben's optimism. No player ever dies. The reason?
You can't give up, and cancer, if you just give up, you won't stand a chance.
That was quick.
Maybe you should make it extra hard.
Yeah.
In 2004, Make-A-Wish made Ben's game available as a free download on its website. And his wish became a gift to young cancer patients everywhere, including the kids at this treatment center in San Francisco.
It's a good game because it's kind of like you're fighting your own cancer cells off. I just don't feel good every time I get knocked down with chemo or that stuff, and it feels good to blast them away.
I feel really good that actually people are playing it and actually liking it.
Yeah, you want some of this?
And people around the world are playing it. Ben's game has been downloaded from the Make-A-Wish website over 200,000 times and is now available in 9 languages.
Coming up, virtual worlds get real and really popular.
A lot of people have always wanted to be somebody else. And you can create whoever it is that you want to be there.
That's next, as Game On continues. What unauthorized games continues.
Whether it was Barbie or G.I. Joe, girls and boys have always played with some sort of doll. But in the past few years, they've been putting them aside for a video game, one that grown-ups love too. In fact, they've made it one of the best-selling games of all time, The Sims.
The Sims is really kind of a, in some sense, a dollhouse come to life.
Will Wright, the creator of The Sims, has been called one of the most important people in gaming, entertainment, and technology.
Will Wright is Albert Einstein with a sense of humor, and that's part of what makes him good. And what he really likes is to see how things work and to tinker with things.
I always liked constructing things as a kid. I spent a lot of time building models. And when I started learning to program computers, I realized that computer was just a different way to build models. I could build models that actually had behavior and came to life.
Before bringing The Sims to life, Wright invented its predecessor, SimCity. A game which, as its name suggests, lets players design and build a city. He got the idea for it while working on a conventional action game.
Which was kind of a arcade helicopter game where you were flying around bombing these factories and islands. I had to create this world of islands and roads and little buildings, and I was basically having more fun building the world than I was bombing it.
But he didn't have that much fun when he tried selling SimCity to software publishers.
They said, okay, now, how do you win? How do you lose? And there was this kind of struggle because they expected there to be an end to the game.
The game sat on the shelf for several years until Wright formed his own publishing company, Maxis.
I'm putting in some industries right now. I'm going to put a school in.
Let's have a new map.
Released in 1989, SimCity became such a hit that it spawned dozens of spin-offs, including The Sims, a game that allows players to create virtual human beings and manage their virtual lives.
Some people play it kind of as a spreadsheet for life. They kind of play out little scenarios, what's going to happen if me and my boyfriend go over and do this.
But here's another scenario. What would happen if instead of a virtual dollhouse, you could play with an entire virtual world and be anybody you wanted to be in that world?
How about a backflip?
Wait a minute. That's my favorite one.
Welcome to Second Life, an interactive 3D digital community that exists only online at the Second Life website. Everything in this virtual world is imagined, created, and owned by its players.
Second Life is an online world that is really the answer to the question, what if we could use computers to simulate the whole world?
Philip Rosedale is CEO of Linden Labs, the San Francisco company that launched Second Life in 2003.
There's so many things in the world that we'd, like to be able to do if we had the time or we had the right tools and equipment, but we can't. In Second Life, you can do those things. If I want to become somebody else, I can just drag who I want to be right onto my body.
In Second Life, as in many online games, you create a digital alter ego known as an avatar.
What have you always wanted to do? Well, a lot of people have always wanted to be somebody else. And you can create whoever it is that you want to be there. It's your fresh start.
But to live well in this virtual world, players must spend real money to buy things in it. For instance, all the artwork in this virtual gallery is for sale.
And the total amount of goods and services that people are selling to each other in Second Life is currently about $5 million US a month.
He's not talking monopoly money. Second Lifers are using real cash to buy virtual items that only exist in cyberspace. Just like kids buy clothes for their dolls, Second Lifers buy wardrobes for their avatars. The market for these virtual goods proved to be a bonanza for Jennifer Vatsa.
Okay, I'll show you one of the Victorian outfits that I made.
She opened a dress shop in Second Life to help pay her family's real bills.
There were times I would just be, my eyes would pop. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe how many of this one dress I sold, or I can't believe people are spending money on this stuff.
Her husband Tim uses Second Life to offer companies a new way to train their employees.
We have started to use Second Life as a training platform for our new recruits. We've built a virtual three-dimensional gas station within the world itself, and we use this to train our new recruits to show them how a gas station works under the asphalt.
But if you want to make a real killing in Second Life, the answer, as in real life, is real estate.
So the most successful entrepreneurs in Second Life are buying and then redeveloping and reselling land.
One of the most famous land barons is An Che Chung. She's been making more than $100,000 a year selling virtual property. But not all the acreage in Second Life belongs to land barons. A large number of universities now own property and are actually teaching genuine classes in this virtual world. And here's yet another virtue of playing in online virtual worlds.
I honestly think that if my friends started playing World of Warcraft, they'd have a boyfriend already.
This woman speaks from experience. A few years ago, Sarah Eagle was at home in Philadelphia playing the online fantasy game Asheron's Call when her avatar suddenly became a damsel in distress. But among the thousands of other players also online in the game was Chris Lai in Seattle.
Someone was yelling for help that, oh, I'm trapped in the Dungeons and Shadows, I'm lost, I don't know how to get out, and I'm probably going to die if nobody comes down and helps me out.
He was there about 10 minutes later, and he saved me.
Sarah and Chris started talking and kept talking over the next several weeks.
Oh, I wonder what kind of bird that is.
It wasn't long before she said something like, oh, well, if you're not doing anything, in December, why don't you come out and visit me? And I was like, sure, what the heck?
They had such a great time that Sarah decided to move to Seattle to be closer to Chris. It wasn't long before wedding bells rang.
My Prince Charming!
Oh, God, don't use that. Incoming Fire Lord.
And they've continued to game on happily ever after, playing the online hit, World of Warcraft.
Oh, I crashed.
Coming up, visions from the visionaries.
It's only really now that we're kind of reaching the zenith of this video game culture. And so we are living in the video game world now.
New worlds to conquer. Next, as Game On continues.
Stop it.
To game.
What the video game industry demands more than anything else these days is more money, especially with production budgets reaching $10 million and above for a single title.
You're getting into Hollywood realms of financing. It's even worse than Hollywood in the sense that you don't get the second and the third and the fourth bite at the apple. You don't have the cable sale, the DVD sale, the foreign sale, the TV sale.
But one extra slice of revenue that has come to the video game industry is in-game advertising. Mitch Davis is the CEO of Massive Incorporated, the leading company in the field.
We do billboards, posters, and the typical type of outdoor advertising that you see within the virtual world.
Consumers have been raising their hand for years for authenticity. If you can think of how bizarre it would be to watch NASCAR and not see a logo on a car, it wouldn't be real.
For advertisers, it's an opportunity to reach an elusive audience.
Men 18 to 34 had stopped watching television and moved increasingly to video games. Now they're playing games 2 hours a night. That's 4 times as much as they're watching television. So if you're Coke or McDonald's or one of the big movie companies and so forth, then you need to be in video games.
Besides advertising, another way to earn more money is to get more players. To Sims creator Will Wright, the key to the industry's future is to move beyond the guy gamers who play all the time.
We've been catering to a hardcore group for the most part over the life of this industry. And those people, were expecting the games to get deeper and deeper, and it was a 10-hour experience, then it was a 20-hour experience, then 40 hours. But I think that as we hit the mass market, we're getting a lot of more casual players coming into the market. They want something that they can pick up and play for 10 minutes, 20 minutes at a time, put down, pick up again later. Games need to become a little bit more flexible in terms of the type of players that they entertain.
Wright believes the solution is allowing players to build their own game worlds, which is exactly the premise behind his newest game, Spore.
Spore enables you to play in your world, create your own world, create a species, and get them to a point where they leave their planet. And then once you leave your planet, you connect to the internet of a universe of other planets created in the exact same way, and you get to go explore other people's planets.
Players love making this stuff, but we give them powerful enough tools. To them, that's as enjoyable as the game. And if we can basically give the players that role, they become co-developers with us.
In the game industry's ideal world, everybody would have a video game device. The truth is, that world is already at our fingertips.
the suitability of the cell phone as a video game deployment platform is just spectacular. And as the screen technologies increase, and the memories and the hardware in those things increase, that's going to be a dominant form of video game delivery, because it's with you all the time.
The founder of Electronic Arts, Trip Hawkins, is a firm believer in mobile gaming's potential. In 2003, he formed a new company, Digital Chocolate, to develop software for cell phones. The ongoing challenge for Hawkins is convincing phone companies to move beyond tried and true games.
Because they seem to think that, well, hey, you know, Pac-Man was created 30 years ago, and that may as well be the best thing ever for your mobile phone. And I'm thinking, well, how could that possibly? That's a little bit like saying Gone with the Wind is going to be the best thing ever that you're going to see on a DVD.
Hawkins' company has developed technology that allows cell phone gamers to not only play solo, but also to compete against each other.
We think of it as a first-rate platform that's a completely new kind of platform, and you have to look for what's unique and different about it.
So far, one of the most unique things about mobile gaming is who's playing. Women, and they're not just playing on cell phones. According to the Entertainment Software Association, more adult women play video games than boys 17 and under. And while the game industry itself is still male-dominated, there are exceptions, like Toby Sulnier. After developing over 60 games, Sulnier decided in 2005 to start her own development company in upstate New York. Within a year, she had 35 employees and 4 titles in the works for Nintendo. And the secret of her success? It's a game.
So in the same way that, you know, people working in the company are working on making a game, I like working on making the company and trying to solve all those problems and pull it together, and that's really what I'm focused on creating, and I get just as much excitement out of doing that as you would get out of making a game. If you're like that, then this is a great industry, because there's always challenge out there.
And always, dreamers, inventors, and hustlers to overcome those challenges. After all, the video game business was founded by visionaries. But even those pioneers are astounded by just how big the industry has gotten.
When I did video games, it was one engineer sitting at a table for a few months, controlling everything. Today's video games, I could no longer do those, and I could make a movie. You know, it's a completely different world.
Who knew what would happen to electronics technology? Could you begin to think of what a microprocessor was going to do to the business in 1966, 67? There wasn't even a word, never mind a reality.
I envisioned it becoming large. I don't think I ever felt that it would be larger than the movie industry, theatrical tickets. I don't think I ever foresaw that.
One thing, however, is clear. Video games paved the way for the interactive technologies that we now can't live without. The internet, the iPod, even ATMs.
It's only really now that we're kind of reaching the zenith of this video game culture, where everything must be interactive. And everything must have some level of interactivity or ability for it, or it's quickly becoming a dinosaur. And so we are living in the video game world now.
Game over.